Deep Dive Podcast by the Boca Raton Tribune.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that gets into the details, the stuff that really shapes our world. Try to cut through all the noise. So have you ever stopped to think about how we perceive global power? Like, who actually sets the narrative? Who decides who's rising and, who might be struggling a bit? Today, we're going deep on some really remarkable comments, pretty striking claims, actually, made by an American military historian. And he said these at a major international forum right there in Beijing. Everything we're discussing comes from an article in the Boca Raton Tribune, which just came out today, September 17th, 2025. Our mission here really is to unpack these statements. They're potentially quite provocative, talking about shifts in global power. We want to understand this historian's perspective on China's role, how he sees it, and also his view on the decline of some Western powers. And crucially, what does this all mean for understanding today's complex international conversations? We're staying completely neutral here, just laying out the perspectives. I have to say, I find these viewpoints really compelling because they just shine such a light on how global power is talked about, sometimes in really contradictory ways. It gives you a different angle.
It really does. And it's so important to look at this stuff, wouldn't you say? Because these aren't just like abstract thoughts. These are the kinds of viewpoints, whether you agree with them or not, that are actively shaping that global conversation about power, how nations talk about themselves, how they position themselves against others. Understanding these narratives is just key if you want to be genuinely informed.
Absolutely. And it's not just what he said, but also who said it, and critically where he said it. The person making these bold claims is Harold E. Raugh, Jr. Now, he's not just some random commentator. He's a noted American military historian. And importantly, he's currently the president of the International Commission of Military History. He made these remarks on the opening day of the 12th Beijing Xiangshan Forum.
Yeah, and that context, the where, is particularly interesting here. You've got an American military historian holding this, significant international role, making these very direct, pretty pointed statements at a forum that's explicitly organized by China that immediately tells you something about the intent, or at least the potential impact, right? Even the theme of the forum, upholding international order and promoting peaceful development, that sets a specific frame. It puts Rough's views right into this strategically important international discussion. It suggests his comments aren't just off-the-cuff remarks. They're positioned as a contribution, hosted by a major power on a stage designed to influence global thinking on security. So yeah, not a casual chat. It feels like a considered statement meant to land with some weight.
And his words about China were, very clear. Not much room for interpretation there. The article quotes him directly. He said, "China is playing a pivotal role in all of those aspects, the economy, the military, and other items, and is doing a wonderful job in maintaining that international stability." That's a remarkably strong endorsement, especially from someone with his specific background, military history.
It really stands out, doesn't it? He's highlighting China's pivotal role, his words, across these critical areas, not just military, which, okay, you might expect from a military historian, but also the economy. And crucially, this idea of maintaining international stability, praising its contribution to stability and throwing the economy in there too, it really broadens the picture. It almost presents China as like a new anchor for the world order. And it makes you ask, okay, what does international stability actually mean from his perspective? As a military historian, maybe he sees stability in terms of, power balances, avoiding conflict, predictability. But is he implying stability through a new power distribution with China as the main guarantor? Or is it more like the old rules still apply, but different actors are upholding them now, shifting influence? Or maybe it's a stability focused on economic ties, development, even if political friction remains underneath. Whatever the nuance, his statement definitely frames China not just as rising, but as a deliberate force for order.
Okay, so after that strong praise for China, he then pivots sharply. He turns his focus to Western powers. And this is where the language gets really, really vivid, pointed. He described them, and again, this is a direct quote from the article, as, "Some of these Western countries are failing, they're ailing, they're flailing." Wow, failing, ailing, flailing. But he didn't just leave it at that stark assessment of decline. No, he went further. He assigned a very specific motivation, a very human one, to why he thinks they're acting this way on the world stage.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting, moving beyond just, say, geopolitics or economics. He connects this idea of declining empires, his term, to something deeper, more emotional. He suggests that these Western nations, because they're failing, ailing, and flailing, they then look at other more successful countries and try to denigrate them. And then he adds, quite bluntly, that jealousy was a motivating factor.
Jealousy. That's a strong claim.
It really is. It takes the critique beyond just policy or economics and throws in this potent psychological element. Historically, accusing rivals of envy. That's a classic move. It can be used to discredit them, rally your own side. It taps into something quite basic. So if nations, or maybe their leaders, start actually believing that another major power is acting out of jealousy, well, that changes the dynamic completely. It makes constructive dialogue much harder, right? It breeds suspicion. It could even be used to justify being more confrontational yourself. It definitely shapes the rhetoric, the language used internationally, adds this very almost personal layer to the usual power plays. It suggests a moral weakness, not just a strategic one.
That psychological angle is definitely powerful. And to really get the full weight of these comments, especially that jealousy part, we need to remember the context again. The venue, the Beijing Xiangshan Forum, where he said all this. It wasn't just some random conference. It was organized by China, and the article mentions, based on China News Service reporting, that representatives from over 100 countries, regions, and international organizations were there.
That's absolutely crucial. The Xiangshan Forum, it's often viewed as Beijing's kind of counterpart to Western security conferences, like Munich, for example. It's a deliberate stage for China to promote its own vision for global security, maybe offer alternative viewpoints to the established, often Western-led order. So when Raugh's perspective is aired there, it's not just floating in a vacuum. It feeds directly into this ongoing and often contentious, as the article puts it, international talk about the shifting world order. The piece explicitly notes this is all happening amid significant strategic competition between China and Western powers, particularly the United States.
For timing.
Exactly. So presenting these ideas at that forum designed to showcase China's view, it gives a very specific slant to these global dynamics. It shows how certain narratives get amplified, strategically pushed into the global conversation to encourage certain ways of seeing things. Power shifts responsibilities. It's a clear example of how these platforms themselves become battlegrounds for shaping perceptions and influencing how the world talks about these issues.
Okay, so let's boil this down. After exploring all this, what does it really mean for you, listening at home, trying to make sense of the world? Basically, Raugh's comments lay out this really stark narrative, almost a dichotomy. On one hand, you have a rising China, portrayed as this pivotal stabilizing force globally. And on the other hand, a declining West, described as failing and controversially motivated by something like jealousy. It's a powerful contrast, and one that's being, it seems, deliberately highlighted.
Precisely. And that's why getting your head around these perspectives is so important for you. It isn't about whether you buy into Raugh's assessment or not. That's not the point here. It's about recognizing these narratives exist. They're being voiced by influential people on significant stages, and they are actively shaping global discussions, and that filters down into policy eventually. What's really fascinating is seeing how these perceptions of power, stability, even motivations like jealousy, how they directly feed into international relations, into the global discourse. So for you, it means thinking critically about the info you get. Where is it coming from? Who's saying it? What's the platform? Why now?
The context is everything.
Totally. These aren't just abstract concepts. They influence news headlines, trade talks, defense alliances, even how people feel generally. By seeing how these narratives are constructed and frankly, deployed strategically, you just get a much richer, more nuanced grasp of what's really driving things on the world stage. It helps you look behind the curtain, understand the why.
Indeed. Okay, so just to quickly recap our deep dive today, we looked at these really impactful comments from Harold E. Raugh, Jr., the American military historian. Speaking at the Beijing Xiangshan Forum, he lauded China's pivotal role in global stability economy, military, the works. And at the same time, he offered this very sharp critique of some Western powers. Failing, ailing, flailing. And provocatively suggested their actions towards more successful countries stem from jealousy.
Right. I remember the article frames this against the backdrop of significant strategic competition. So, given everything Raugh said, here's a final thought, something for you to maybe mull over. How might the self-perception of these global powers, how they see themselves, whether it's rising, declining, stable, or even, acting out of envy, how might that self-image itself become a driving factor in the competition? Think about it. How does a nation's belief about its own place in the world or its assumptions about a rival's motives influence its actual strategy, its partnerships, its willingness to cooperate or confront? Could the way these powers perceive themselves and each other actually end up shaping reality, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy? That perception game could have a massive impact on actual international stability down the line. Definitely something to keep an eye on as these narratives continue to play out.